The rugged north face of Mount Timpanogos keeps watch over this peaceful Utah mountain valley locals call North Fork. The unique beauty and terrain inspire many visitors. Hello, I'm Camille Dixon at Historic Cove Fort. If I were to say I've been up the North Fork of Provo Canyon, few would know exactly where I was talking about. But if I say I've been up to Sundance, most would know immediately the location. There's nothing like a movie personality the caliber of Robert Redford establishing a resort and arts center to put a place on the map. But Sundance is a relatively recent development, built on a foundation laid by others. On this edition of Utah Storybook, we'll remember the days of the North Fork before Sundance. For Native Americans, Provo Canyon was an important path from the high Uintas to Utah Lake's abundant fish and wildlife. Yet little evidence remains that Native Americans lived permanently in the North Fork area. Europeans who settled Utah Valley used the North Fork area for grazing livestock, but little else. The first to see any potential for settlement were the Stewarts. Surveyors Andrew Jackson Stewart, Jr., with two of his sons, John R. and Scott P., first saw the North Fork area in 1899.
They did the U.S. geological surveys for the entire state. So that was just in their line of work, they came to the canyon. And I always say, they looked all around and said, this is a pretty place, let's buy it. And they did.
Buying the land involved homesteading. And since a single individual could only acquire 160 acres by homesteading, the surveyor Stewarts convinced family and in-laws to participate with them. A family corporation administered the holdings. Even then, some purchases from the land office were required at a maximum sum of $2.50 per acre. Homesteading required the land be worked and improved. Deep snow precluded all but short visits during the winter. The summer was when cabins could be built, livestock grazed, and crops tended.
My father he considered him a gentleman farmer, but he was more of a gentleman than he was a farmer. So everything we lost money on every kind of thing we did farming. There's about 100 acres in there that's quite flat, and so we raised potatoes. That was one thing that it wasn't too cold for. Oh, he tried pigs, and they all died. There were so many. We used to call them pot guts. That's a naughty name, though. Ground squirrels around that ate everything. That Dad put some poison in some. I guess it was oatmeal or something like that, and put it around in the holes. But the pigs came that they was trying to and ate it, and all died. So we had lots of ill-fated agricultural adventures.
The lack of a good road meant getting supplies to and from town was difficult, compounding the problems with trying to raise a crop. It also meant the Stewarts were pretty much alone in their canyon. Getting to town was a major undertaking.
Get up at 4 o'clock, as I told you, and bathe in a tub and walk down and catch the Heber Creeper, the train. Train left at 6 in the morning and came back at 6 at night, approximately. But it was cold getting down there in the morning, especially when you had to walk. We'd go up in a wagon, and the boys, my oldest brothers, would be outside the wagon, and they'd be carrying rocks, big as they could carry, so that if the horses started to not be able to make it, then they would run and put the rocks under the wheels.
Despite the bad roads, people sometimes hiked from the mouth of North Fork to see the views in the canyon and climb Mount Timpanogos. The occasional sheep herder would trade the Stewart women homemade bread for mutton roasts. For the Stewart children, there was always something to do.
And you just do what all kids do. You make fun out of whatever there is. And we had a lot of work to do. We had a garden, and so that we were always moving rocks, and the garden was watered from the creek, but we had to build a little stream from the creek, you know, and put in a dam. And there were just always lots of things. And then we all read. We brought up a lot of books. And I don't ever remember being bored, although I was glad for school to start, because that did bring somebody except the family. There was a man that came up several summers. He was some kind of a, not a horticulturist, what do you call people who are interested in bugs?
Entomologist?
An entomologist of some kind. And he came up, he thought he had found a particular beetle that was not found anyplace else. And so he came up several times, and he would put out a lantern at night, which attracted these beetles, and we would all try to catch them for him. I think it turned out they weren't as valuable as he thought, but we had a lot of fun. We thought we were doing important work to catch the beetles.
Utah County constructed a road capable of automobile traffic up the North Fork Canyon in 1920. The Stewarts had donated several parcels of land in the canyon. The MIA home, now known as Brigham Young University's Timp Lodge, was one donation. Another was made to the Scouts, but was later returned. Recognizing the capacity for the scenery to expand young minds, BYU inquired about a summer campus in the area, known as Aspen Grove.
They came to them and said they'd like to build a school there. And so they donated the land for the school. That was really what they did it for, because they thought it was a good thing for the church and for the BYU, and they thought it would be good for us to have people up there. I think it wasn't all altruistic. It was partly they thought it would be good for us. We moved our house up to Aspen Grove, and it was more fun because we'd see everybody who came along. Mother had a little store in it, and everybody who came by would buy a bar or we didn't have much. We ate most of the things that was in there. Mother lost money on the store because we ate more.
In the Depression years, the canyon played host to civilian Conservation Corps workers. They built campgrounds, improved the road, and repaired damaged watersheds in the area.
An interesting time was when the CCC came up there. We then had the house at Aspen Grove, and Mother felt that we were much above the folks in the CCC camp. She had an idea that they were all tramps from the slums of New York. They built Theater of the Pines, that they called. That was built by the CCCs. And they built a lot of other things up there too, but those were the things that were built right on the flat. And it was interesting for me because it was fun to have all those boys up there, but they were strictly off limits as far as my mother was concerned. I don't know what she thought who they were that was so terrible, but anybody from New York seemed to her to be suspect somehow anyway.
With an improved road came the opportunity to show the area off to more and more visitors who stopped in at the Stewart store.
And she would practically grab them off the street to come, and she'd sit them down and she'd say, "Have you ever seen a view like that?" They'd say, "No, and we've been to Switzerland, we've been every place, and we've never seen a view like that." And then Mother would say to everybody, "Why, there were people here who've been every place, and they'd never seen a view like that." So that was true. She was a great promoter. Father and his brother always thought of making money. They didn't think of it as a recreation place. They thought of it as a place to make money, but they never did. You can't hold land if you don't, unless you're rich, because the taxes have to be paid. So you have to have some way of making money unless you have a fortune yourself. And we didn't ever have any money, so. So that was not possible. We had a little sign that we put out in front of the house on the road that said lots for sale. And on Sunday, which was the only time we were there, we would show lots to people, but nobody was interested.
What did the lot go for?
We were selling them for $1,000, and they were half-acre lots, and the road was in, and the water was in, but nobody was interested. Now, when I think what they get for those lots up there.
Although farming and real estate development were never very successful for the Stewarts, they supplemented their earnings with income from grazing and logging to pay the property taxes. As the end of World War II approached, however, Ray Stewart saw in his family's property the opportunity to spread his enthusiasm for a sport that was just catching on in Utah, skiing. His love for the sport began as a teenager in the 1920s, making his own ski equipment.
Well, folks gave us a book at Christmas time called The Wonder World, a book of knowledge sort of thing. And it had the description of how to shape and bend the boards and make it into skis. And we took it down to the book down to the junior high school, and the woodwork teacher worked right along with us, and dozens of pairs of skis were made from that start.
Ray improved his skiing while living in Salt Lake City. As part of the war effort, he helped administer a civilian defense ski corps trained in mountain rescue techniques. When Ray moved back to Utah County to work in the then newly opened Geneva steel plant, he was asked to form a new branch of the ski corps.
I went around the kids we used to ski with when we were younger, and nobody was interested in this ski patrol. So I put an ad in the paper, say, if you want to learn to ski, come on out. And so we had 2 or 3 dozen.
He would meet us at Wildwood, and we'd drive up. And he was going to check out whether we could ski or not. And so we got up part way, and the road was, we couldn't go any farther. And so Ray, in his usual inventive manner, he put on the change and turned the vehicle around so he had a front-wheel drive. And we sat on the back bumper, and he backed up the rest of the way. And that was where we met Ray. We hiked up to the girls' home, and we skied down. And then he said, okay, we could be a part of it.
Members of this group of ski enthusiasts would help Ray over the next few years assemble the pieces of one of Utah's pioneer ski resorts. Ray's ski patrol trained in many areas, but a favorite spot was just south of present-day Timp Lodge, known in those days as the MIA home, or the girls' home.
We didn't have a ski lift, and to climb up the hill 4 or 5 times a day would be all you could muster.
Some other people had this rope tow. It was up by Deer Creek, and they didn't have enough snow, and then so they put it up by the girls' home, and then they were all drafted into the military, and so Ray got permission to use it, and so he bought the rope, and he started this ski tow.
Junior Banus, who would become an internationally known ski instructor, was among the members of Ray's Civilian Defense Ski Corps. He, with Frank Hurst, spent countless hours at the rope tow site, passing on their enthusiasm for the sport to others.
You had to walk from the parking lot down below, roughly 2 miles, to get to this location, carrying your skis. Then you started to learn to ski. And so right down in here was the beginning teaching hill before you were allowed or had the nerve or technique to go up the rope tow. This is looking up the main run, and all of this vegetation has grown, as I say, since 1945, roughly, when it was used for the last times. But this was the main run. It looks so tiny and so insignificant now, but yet you think of all of the people in Provo that learned to ski here. But looking down again, you can see the vegetation has pretty well filled, but it shows some evidence of the old run here at Stewart's Flats. But this is where the old car engine stood with the rope mechanism. Once you had your mitts and the rope became icy, very often it would be hard to grip and hold on to the rope tow, especially going up a steep incline like this one happened to be.
So I got to be the first one to go up the rope tow. And so I hung on, and as I got to the top of the tow, the rope twisted and got my gloves, and I ran through the pulley, my arm did, and I was hanging up off the ground, and they were down at the other end pulling on the rope to stop the motor. So next time we went up, he had a little switch there that if you went beyond a certain point, you turned it off.
Ray decided that if he was going to have a proper ski area, he would have to eliminate the hour walk from the parking lot to the rope tow. So he moved it to the area where the base for Sundance Resort sits today. Timp Haven was the name Ray and his wife Ava selected for the resort from entries submitted in a contest. He paid his brother Paul $100 a year for the use of the land on which Paul grazed sheep during the summer.
Back in the 40s, where you look and see the biggest pine trees, the dark trees, the heaviest forest, this whole thing was covered with heavy pines at that time. This is why originally the rope tow was not located here. It was a steep hill, it was heavy timbered, and they had to go into an area where they could find aspens and things easier to cut. Well, we cleared small amounts, but about that time, you know, the good bulldozers were coming on the market, the Caterpillar tractors. And so in here we were able then to start utilizing the Caterpillar diesel tractors to do the clearing. We kept the rope tow the same length, the same type. Okay, so the rope tow era lasted again a few years in this location. The big advancement from that rope tow was to a cable tow.
They had these little things that clamped onto the cable, and people would sit. It was like a little bar. And people would sit on this little bar, and you'd clamp onto the cable and be ready to go quickly. If you didn't, you fell on your head. And it also wore lots of gloves out that year. I'm sure the sporting good people were very happy to have us because everybody sold lots of gloves, because they'd go through their hands, and then as they got to the top, they just would slack up on it, and it would fall off. You know, the T-bar thing, a little paddle, and then they were supposed to wrap it around their waist and ski down with it. Some of them didn't do that; they just left them up there. So we had to go up and gather them every so often.
And there were very few of us who were doing recreational jumping just for the fun of it. However, we had an interest. It grew from jumping over sagebrush, I guess, until finally we came down and had Alf Engen help design a jumping hill over in this location. It came down over this knoll, and then there was a long wooden platform built with pine trees to give you the altitude. And the first thing at the bottom of the hill you came to is the stream. The stream was open water, ran all winter, and so your next jump was to jump the creek. In other words, you couldn't stop without going and jumping over the stream. The next jump was the road came in, and so you still had too much mile per hour, too much speed. So you jump the jump, you jump the creek, then you jump the road, then you could coast to a stop out on the hill on the other side. So you got 3 jumps for every one. And you couldn't afford to miss any of them, or you'd be either in the water or the road or in trouble somewhere.
In 1950, I joined forces, 53. I joined forces with my brother, Paul, and Junior Panus, and we moved a chairlift from Kimball Junction up out of just below Park City and put it in the Timp Haven.
It took the process of the whole summer in order to transport and get this little lift down and start to locate it in place. Now you see steel towers. Those days we cut down a pine tree, stripped it, planted it. That became your tower for the construction. And at this time Ray had purchased the half-track, the Army vehicle, and this helped immensely in the clearing. We could build cranes to lift things with it. And so the cable came out and the chairlift was relocated then from Snyder to this location. Our bottom terminal was here, and it went right through this cut where later on this chairlift came in. And it went just a little farther than you can see, but it again opened up twice the terrain that we had before.
And one of us went over and wiped off one of the chairs, and someone looked up at the circs and on the Timp and said, "Looks like it's going to be a good snow year." And that was about all that was said. Ray was standing there as proud as could be, but he just nodded his head.
For Ray Stewart and his wife Ava, building the resort they called Timp Haven was an avocation. Keeping the resort running and expanding was a full-time job in itself, but rarely did it make enough money so he could give up a full-time job elsewhere. Ava contributed her best to Timp Haven as well.
I had a little Ava's lunch stand that was set by the creek, and we sold hamburgers. When we really got into skiing, the hamburgers were $1, beautiful big hamburgers, soda pop, which we kept in the creek to keep it cold, and it was mighty cold and lovely. And then we made hot chocolate, and we sold candy bars. I think they were 10 cents or a nickel. And we had our little affair there. And it was a warming hut for the skiers also. We had an old, what they called a heater-roller stove with a grill on the top of it. And they'd all come in and put their gloves on the top so we could tell where they had been skiing because they all had little grill marks on the top of their gloves and their hats. But we attended the kids and watched them and made them comfortable as can be.
And Ava Stewart, she met a lot of the people when they were coming for food and so forth. And so the character of Timp Haven was really kind of a gentle, caring character, you know. And the hills were not as steep as at many places. And so a lot of people really enjoyed skiing there.
We have always said we didn't make any money, but we made lots of friends, wonderful friends from this area.
In those days, the imagination couldn't possibly comprehend the potential development. So again, it was a love or interest in doing something that was fun more than a financial gain. And this was, the credit has to go to Ray. Yes, Paul had the property and so forth and the facility, but Ray and Ava were the ones with the ideas, the desire, the time commitment of personal time to make it happen. And it wasn't financial gain as much was to see something grow and develop. And this is what they did. And it's hundreds of hours of time, of non-compensated time to do that. So it's a big commitment that they made. And the benefit is Utah Valley.
he never gave up on it. And it was a big sacrifice for him and his family. But once he started, he always worked it through, and that was really kind of amazing, because I don't think they were making a lot of money on it. It was just true desire to achieve a goal.
By 1960, Ray and Ava sold their interest in Timp Haven to Paul Stewart. Ray taught skiing for many years after, and even competed as an octogenarian. In the late 1960s, the resort passed to Robert Redford and became known as Sundance. To recognize Ray Stewart's contribution to skiing, Sundance named a ski run after him, and the University of Utah honored Ray as a Utah ski pioneer. The Stewart family contribution falls in Utah's second generation of pioneering. They built on the contribution of Utah's first-generation settlers, like those who built Cove Fort. John and Scott Stewart, with their heirs, worked to expand life in Utah beyond basic survival, into enjoyment of Utah's natural environment.
But he loved the place, and he always knew that it would be something. I, these days, wish that he could see the development. He thought development was fine. We've kind of worried about how we wondered if it was all that fine, but he'd be thrilled to know the people that were interested and loved it, because he and his brother really loved that place. They'd seen the whole state, and they thought it was the most beautiful place in the state.
Well, I just knew that I had this strong feeling that sometime there's going to be a breakthrough.